The night was cold, unforgivingly cold, as the winds howled through the silent valleys of Himachal. Snow clung to the trees like a frozen memory, and the road ahead had long disappeared beneath layers of ice and mud. Ishan tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his old Jeep, his breath visible in the freezing air. He had always chased solitude, believing it to be his greatest companion. But tonight, that silence felt different, heavier. The tires slipped. In a moment of panic, the vehicle jerked and sank into a patch of slush, the engine groaning before falling into an eerie stillness. Ishan stepped out, his boots sinking into the cold earth, his fingers already trembling. No signal, no sound, just the deafening quiet of the mountains. He had no choice but to walk. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, each step draining the last bit of warmth from his body. Just when his strength began to fade, he saw it. A wooden cottage, standing alone on a slope, smoke rising gently from its chimney like a silent invitation. Hope flickered within him. With numb hands, he knocked. The door creaked open, and there he was, Aryan, tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly commanding. His presence filled the doorway like a storm waiting to happen. Dressed simply, yet carrying an intensity that made the air feel warmer and more dangerous at the same time. His eyes locked onto Ishan's, sharp and unreadable, as if seeing far more than what stood before him. "Need help?" His deep voice echoed. Ishan swallowed, his voice barely steady. "My car, it's stuck. Can I stay here for the night?" There was a brief pause. Then Aryan stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth of the fire wrapped around Ishan the moment he entered, but it wasn't just the flames. It was something else, something unspoken. Aryan handed him a blanket, their fingers brushing for the briefest second. And yet, that touch lingered, like a spark, like something that had been waiting far too long to ignite. "You're freezing," Aryan said quietly, his gaze intense but steady. "You should change. There's no one else here." There was something in his tone, not forceful yet impossible to ignore. Ishan hesitated, then slowly nodded. As the fire crackled in the background and shadows danced across the wooden walls, the distance between two strangers began to dissolve. Silently, dangerously, and perhaps inevitably. Outside, the storm grew louder. But inside that cottage, something far deeper had just begun. The fire crackled softly, filling the wooden cottage with a golden glow that danced across the walls like flickering memories. Outside, the storm had grown fiercer. The wind howled against the windows, and snow struck the glass in restless waves. But inside, there was warmth, a strange, enveloping warmth that seemed to come not just from the flames, but from the quiet presence of the man standing a few steps away. Ishan sat near the fire, the blanket wrapped tightly around his shoulders, trying to steady his breathing. His body was still recovering from the cold, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Every now and then, his eyes drifted toward Aryan, who moved around the cabin with calm, controlled ease, placing a kettle over the fire, adjusting the logs, as if this solitude was his natural state. "Drink this," Aryan said after a while, handing him a steaming cup. Their fingers brushed again. This time, Ishan felt it more clearly. Not just warmth, but a quiet intensity that lingered beneath the surface. "Thank you," Ishan murmured, lowering his gaze as he took the cup. The heat seeped into his palms, grounding him, but his awareness remained sharply fixed on Aryan's presence. There was something about him, something that felt both reassuring and dangerous at the same time. "Photographer?" Aryan asked suddenly, his eyes flicking toward the camera bag lying near the door. Ishan nodded. "Yeah, I travel a lot. I like capturing places people don't usually go to." Aryan gave a faint, almost unreadable smile. "And tonight you found one." There was a pause, not awkward, but charged, the kind of silence that carried unspoken questions. "Do you live here alone?" Ishan asked carefully. Aryan didn't answer immediately. He stood by the fire, his face half-lit, half-shadowed. For a moment it seemed like he might ignore the question. But then he spoke, his voice lower now. "Yes, just one word. but it carried weight. Ishan didn't push further. Instead, he sipped the drink, letting the warmth settle inside him. Slowly, the trembling in his hands began to fade. The storm outside continued its relentless rhythm, but inside, time seemed to slow, stretching into something quieter, more intimate. "You should dry your clothes properly," Arian said after a while. "They won't warm up like that." Ishan hesitated again, but there it was, that same unspoken authority in Arian's voice. Not forceful, yet impossible to ignore. He slowly set the cup aside. The firelight flickered as he stood up, the blanket slipping slightly from his shoulders. For a brief second, he felt Arian's gaze linger. Not intrusive, not crude, just deeply aware. And that awareness made his heartbeat quicken. He turned slightly, pretending to focus on hanging his damp clothes near the fire, but he could feel it, that silent tension building in the room, like the air before a storm breaks. "You don't come across people here often, do you?" Ishan said, trying to ease the silence. Arian stepped closer. Not too close, but enough for his presence to feel unmistakable. "No," he replied. Another pause. Then, more quietly, "Not people like you." Ishan looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside seemed to disappear. The storm, the cold, the isolation, all of it fading into the background. There was only that gaze. That strange, magnetic pull neither of them could quite explain. "You should rest," Arian said eventually, breaking the moment. He gestured toward a bed laid out near the corner of the cabin. "You've had a long night." Ishan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he would actually be able to sleep. He lay down slowly, the blanket pulled over him again, the warmth of the fire still lingering in his skin. But his senses remained alert, aware of every movement Arian made, every shift in the room. Arian dimmed the lantern slightly. The cabin grew quieter, darker. Only the soft glow of the fire remained. Ishan closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily, because somewhere in that silence, between the crackling fire and the distant roar of the storm, he could feel it. Something had changed. Something had begun. And whatever it wasn't going to let either of them walk away the same. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, two strangers lay under the same roof, bound not by fate alone, but by something far more powerful, far more dangerous, something neither of them had yet dared to name. Sleep never truly came to Ishan that night. He lay still beneath the blanket, his eyes closed, yet his senses wide awake, listening to the rhythm of the storm, the crackle of burning wood, and somewhere in between, the quiet presence of Arian. It was strange how aware he felt, as if every small movement in the room echoed inside him. At some point, he opened his eyes. The fire had dimmed slightly, its glow softer now, casting long shadows that stretched across the wooden walls. Arian was still awake. He sat near the fire, elbows resting on his knees, staring into the flames, as if they held answers to questions no one else could understand. There was something heavy in his silence, something distant. Ishan watched him for a moment before speaking, his voice low so it wouldn't break whatever fragile calm existed between them. "You don't sleep much, do you?" Arian didn't turn immediately. For a few seconds, the only response was the sound of the fire shifting. Then, quietly, "Not anymore." Ishan pushed himself up slightly, leaning against the wooden wall behind him. "Night like this feels like it should be peaceful," he said. "But it doesn't feel that way here." That made Arian look at him. Their eyes met again, this time not with curiosity, but with something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Peace isn't something you find in places," Arian said slowly. "It's something you carry, or something you lose." The words settled between them. Ishan felt them more than he understood them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Arian stood up. He walked toward the window, pushing the curtain aside slightly. Outside, the storm raged on, wild and relentless. The wind howled like a warning, and the forest beyond the cabin looked darker than before, almost alive in its movement. "You chose a dangerous night to get lost," Arian said, Still looking outside, Ishan gave a faint smile. Or maybe I chose the right one. Arian glanced back at him. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something softer than before, yet guarded. Why do you travel alone? Arian asked. Ishan took a moment before answering. I guess I feel more honest when I'm alone, he said. No expectations, no noise, just me, and whatever I'm trying to understand. And have you understood it? Arian asked. Ishan shook his head slightly. Not really. A quiet breath left Arian's lips, almost like a silent acknowledgement. Some things don't make sense, he said. No matter how far you go. The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't empty. Felt shared. Arian stepped away from the window and moved closer. Not abruptly, not forcefully. Just enough for the distance between them to feel intentional. He stopped a few steps away from Ishan, his gaze steady, his presence impossible to ignore. Still cold? He asked. Ishan hesitated, then nodded. Arian reached for another log and placed it into the fire. Flames rose again, stronger now, filling the room with renewed warmth. But as he straightened, his hand brushed lightly against Ishan's arm. It was a simple touch, brief, yet it sent a quiet shiver through Ishan's body. Not from the cold, but from something else entirely. Neither of them pulled away immediately. For a moment time seemed to pause. Then Arian stepped back. You should try to sleep, he said, though his voice had softened. Morning won't come easy in this weather. Ishan lay back again, but this time he didn't close his eyes right away. Instead, he watched Arian. Watched the way he moved, the way he carried himself. Controlled, guarded, yet not untouched by whatever this moment was becoming. You're not what I expected, Ishan said quietly. Arian raised an eyebrow slightly. And what did you expect? Ishan thought for a second. Someone colder. Arian let out a faint, almost amused breath. You don't know me well enough to decide that. Maybe not, Ishan admitted. But I can feel things. Arian didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Something passed between them in that silence. Unspoken, undefined, yet undeniable. The storm outside grew louder again. A sudden crack of thunder echoed through the mountains, followed by the sound of something shifting outside. Branches snapping, snow falling from heavy limbs. The cabin creaked slightly under the pressure of the wind. Ishan instinctively sat up again. Was that? Before he could finish, Arian's expression changed. Sharpened, focused. He raised a hand slightly, signaling silence. Now Ishan could hear it too. Not the wind, not the storm. Something else. A distant, heavy sound. Slow, deliberate, moving through the snow outside. Arian moved quickly but quietly, stepping toward the door, his movements precise, controlled. He picked up something from beside the wall. An old metal tool, solid and heavy. Stay here, he said, his voice low but firm. Ishan's heartbeat quickened. The warmth of the cabin suddenly felt fragile, uncertain. The sound outside came again, closer this time. A low, guttural noise carried by the wind. Ishan's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. Arian stood near the door now, completely still, listening, waiting. The fire flickered behind him, casting his shadow across the floor like something larger than life. Strong, unyielding, ready. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then, a sudden against the door. Hard, violent. The wood rattled. Ishan flinched. Another hit followed, heavier this time, accompanied by a deep, raw growl that sent a chill down his spine. It's not human, Ishan whispered. Arian didn't respond, but his grip on the tool tightened. Outside, the creature struck again. And inside that small wooden cabin, the fragile line between safety and danger began to blur. The against the door grew louder, more desperate, more violent, as if something outside had lost all patience. The wooden frame groaned under the pressure, each echoing through the cabin like a warning. Ishan's breath caught in his throat. He had faced storms before, isolation before, but this was different. This felt alive. Arian stood firm near the door, his entire body alert, every muscle tense yet controlled. The flickering fire behind him carved sharp lines across his face, making his expression look even more intense. Focused, fearless, and strangely protective. "Stay back," he said again, his voice low but commanding. Ishan didn't argue. He moved off the bed slowly, instinct pulling him closer, but not too close. His eyes remained fixed on Arian, watching the way he positioned himself between the danger outside and everything inside. Another crash. This time, the door almost gave in. A deep, guttural roar followed, shaking the air itself. Ishan felt a cold wave run through him. "What is that?" Arian exhaled slowly, as if calculating every second. "A bear," he said. "And it's not here by accident." Before Ishan could respond, the door shook again. Harder, more aggressive. Splinters cracked along the edges. The creature outside was no longer testing. It was forcing its way in. Arian moved swiftly. He grabbed a burning log from the fire, the flames licking along its surface, casting wild shadows across the room. The heat illuminated his face, determined, unflinching. "Whatever happens," he said without looking back, "don't run outside." Ishan nodded, even though Arian couldn't see him. The next second, the door burst open. Wood cracked and gave way as a massive shape pushed through the broken frame. Snow and cold wind rushed inside along with it. The bear, huge, furious, driven by hunger or desperation, let out a deafening roar that filled the entire cabin. For a moment, time froze. Then everything happened at once. Arian stepped forward without hesitation, swinging the burning log toward the creature. Flames flared, and the bear recoiled slightly, its instincts clashing between fear and aggression. "Back!" Arian shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The bear swiped forward, its shaking the floor beneath them. The cabin felt too small, too fragile for something this wild. Ishan's heart pounded violently in his chest. He wanted to move, wanted to help, but his body refused, caught between fear and disbelief. All he could see was Arian, standing there like a wall between him and death. Another swing of fire, another roar. The flames finally did what strength alone could not. The bear staggered back, snarling, its form retreating through the broken doorway. For a brief second, it lingered, then turned, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Silence, sudden, heavy. Only the sound of the storm remained. Arian didn't move immediately. He stood there, breathing heavily, the burning log still in his hand, his eyes fixed on the doorway as if expecting the creature to return. When he was sure it was gone, he dropped the log back into the fire. The tension in his shoulders slowly released. Behind him, Ishan finally moved. His legs felt weak as he stepped forward, his mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. You could have," his voice broke. "You could have been hurt." Arian turned. For the first time, the edge in his expression softened. "I'm fine," he said simply. But Ishan didn't stop. He closed the distance between them without thinking. Before he could second-guess himself, he reached out, his hands gripping Arian's arms, as if needing to feel that he was real, that he was safe. "You stood in front of it," Ishan said, his voice low, unsteady. "You didn't even hesitate." Arian looked at him, really looked at him. "There was no time to hesitate," he replied. Their closeness now felt different. Not accidental, not uncertain. The storm, the danger, the fear, it had stripped something away between them. What remained was raw, unguarded, and deeply real. Ishan realized how close they were, how his hands were still on Arian, how their breaths were mixing in the cold air. For a second, neither moved. Then Arian's hand came up, slowly, deliberately, and rested against Ishan's shoulder. The touch was steady, grounding. "You're shaking," Arian said quietly. "I thought," Ishan swallowed. "I thought I was going to lose you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Arian's expression changed again. Something deeper flickered in his eyes, something almost vulnerable, yet quickly hidden beneath control. You don't even know me, Arian said. Maybe not, Ishan replied. But I know what I saw. A pause. Longer this time. Heavier. The fire crackled behind them, the broken door letting in cold air that wrapped around their bodies. But neither stepped away. Instead, Arian moved closer. Just slightly. Enough to erase the last bit of distance between them. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to just this cabin, this silence, this unspoken connection. You should sit, Arian said softly, though his voice had lost its earlier. But Ishan didn't move. Neither did Arian. Something held them there. Something neither of them seemed willing to break. Outside, the storm continued its relentless rage. Inside, two lives, once strangers, had crossed a line neither of them fully understood. And somewhere between fear and warmth, between danger and comfort, something deeper had begun to take shape. The cold air from the broken door drifted slowly into the cabin, weaving through the fading warmth like a quiet reminder of how close danger had come. The storm outside had not calmed. In fact, it seemed louder now, more restless, as if the mountains themselves were reacting to what had just happened. But inside, everything had shifted. Ishan was still standing close to Arian, his hands no longer gripping tightly, yet not fully withdrawn either. There was hesitation in his movements now, not from fear but from awareness. Awareness of how close they were. Awareness of something that had crossed beyond simple gratitude or coincidence. Arian stepped back first. Not abruptly, not coldly, just enough to create space where there had been none. He turned slightly, dragging a heavy wooden table toward the broken door, blocking the opening as best as he could. The sound of wood scraping against the floor broke the fragile silence between them. We need to keep the cold out, he said, his voice steady again, though softer than before. Ishan nodded, though his eyes remained on him. There was something different now. The fear had faded, but in its place, something far more complicated had taken root. I can help, Ishan said, stepping forward. Together, they reinforced the door, pushing furniture, adjusting what little they had to create a barrier between them and the wild outside. Their movements were quiet, coordinated without words, as if an unspoken understanding had already formed between them. At one point, their hands brushed again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. It was brief, but intentional. When they finally stepped back, the cabin felt smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally. Like the space between them had narrowed in a way neither could ignore anymore. Arian exhaled slowly and glanced at the fire. It'll hold, he said. Ishan nodded. But he wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at Arian. Why do you live like this? He asked quietly. The question lingered. Arian didn't answer right away. He walked back toward the fire, crouching slightly to adjust the logs, his face once again caught between shadow and light. For a moment, it seemed like he might avoid the question altogether, but something in the silence demanded an answer. Some places, Arian began slowly, are easier to survive in than others. Ishan frowned slightly. This feels more like hiding than surviving. That made Arian look up. Their eyes met again. But this time, there was no distance left to hide behind. Maybe it is, Arian admitted. The honesty in his voice caught Ishan off guard. He stepped closer again, more carefully this time, as if approaching something fragile. From what? Ishan asked. Arian held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. From things that don't stay buried, he said quietly. The words were vague, but heavy. Ishan didn't push further. Instead, he sat down near the fire again, the warmth brushing against his skin, though it didn't quite reach the thoughts forming in his mind. After everything that had happened, the storm, the isolation, the bear, this moment felt strangely more intense than all of it. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about truth. And neither of them seemed ready to face it fully. You saved me, Ishan said after a while. Arian didn't respond. You didn't have to, Ishan continued. You could have just let me leave. Or never opened the door at all. Arian's jaw tightened slightly. I don't leave people out there to die, he said. That's not what I meant, Ishan replied softly. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, more quietly, "You didn't just save me from the storm." Arian's expression shifted. Just slightly, but enough. The fire crackled louder, as if filling the space where words failed. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the walls, testing the strength of the cabin. But inside, neither of them moved away. "You should get some rest," Arian said finally, though his voice had lost its earlier firmness. Ishan didn't argue this time. He lay back down, pulling the blanket over himself again. But his eyes remained open, watching Arian as he moved around the cabin. For a while, Arian stayed near the fire. Then, after what felt like a long stretch of silence, he walked over and sat down. Not too far from Ishan, but not distant either. Close enough. Safe enough. Neither spoke. But the silence between them no longer felt uncertain. Felt shared. Ishan's eyes slowly began to close, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up with him. But just before sleep could fully take over, he felt something. Presence. Closer than before. He opened his eyes slightly. Arian was there. Sitting beside him now, his posture relaxed for the first time since the night began. His hand rested near the edge of the blanket, not touching, but close enough to be felt. "Try to sleep," Arian said quietly. Ishan nodded faintly. This time, when he closed his eyes, he didn't fight it. Because for the first time since the storm began, he didn't feel alone. And somewhere in that fragile, fleeting moment between danger and dawn, between strangers and something more, both of them found a kind of silence that wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Morning didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, gently, like a secret unfolding across the mountains. The storm had weakened sometime before dawn, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unreal after the chaos of the night. Snow lay thick across the landscape, untouched and glowing faintly under the pale light of the rising sun. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Only soft embers remained, casting a faint warmth into the room. Ishan stirred. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the scent of wood and smoke, the distant silence. It all felt like a dream. But then, it came back. The storm, the bear, and Arian. His eyes opened fully. Arian was not beside him. A strange emptiness settled in his chest. He sat up quickly, the blanket slipping from his shoulders as he looked around. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. For a brief second, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him more than anything else from the night before. Had it all been just a moment that had already passed? "Ishan." The voice came from behind him, deep, familiar. He turned. Arian stood near the doorway, now partially cleared, the morning light falling across his figure. He looked different in daylight, not less intense but more real. The shadows that had hidden parts of him were gone, replaced by something clearer, something human. "You're awake," Arian said. Ishan exhaled slowly, a faint smile forming without him realizing it. "I thought you'd left." Arian shook his head slightly. "Not without making sure you're safe." The words were simple, but they carried something more. Ishan stood up, walking toward him. The cold air still slipped through the edges of the barricaded door, but it didn't feel as harsh anymore. "Looks like the storm's over," Ishan said, glancing outside. "For now," Arian replied. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, but filled with something unspoken. Reality. The kind that waits quietly after everything intense has passed. "My jeep," Ishan began. "I'll help you get it out," Arian said before he could finish. "Once the is clear." Ishan nodded, but he didn't move, because there was something else. Something heavier than the storm, heavier than the night they had just survived. "What happens now?" he asked. Arian's gaze shifted. For a brief moment, something guarded returned to his expression. "You go back," he said, "to your world." "And you?" Ishan asked. Arian didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved toward the mountains, distant and quiet under the morning light. "I stay here." The words landed harder than expected. Ishan felt it, a quiet ache forming somewhere he couldn't ignore. "Just like that," he said softly. Arian looked at him again. That's how it was before you came. Silence followed. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt heavier, because now, they both knew what existed between them, and walking away from it wouldn't be simple. You said something last night, Ishan said slowly, about not finding peace in places, but carrying it. Arian's expression shifted slightly. I remember, he said. Ishan took a step closer. Maybe peace isn't something you lost, he continued. Maybe it's something you stopped letting yourself feel. Arian held his gaze. There was resistance there, but also something else. Something uncertain. You don't know what I've done, Arian said quietly. Maybe not, Ishan replied. But I know what you did last night. A pause. Long. Meaningful. You protected me, Ishan said. You didn't have to, but you did. Arian's jaw tightened slightly. That doesn't change anything. Maybe it does, Ishan said. Their eyes locked again, and this time neither looked away. Outside, the sunlight grew stronger, spreading across the snow-covered valley, turning the cold landscape into something almost beautiful. Inside, something equally fragile stood between them. A choice. I don't want this to be just one night, Ishan said finally. The words were quiet, but clear. Arian didn't respond right away. You could almost see the conflict in his eyes, the pull of something he had buried for too long, and the fear of what it meant to let it surface again. People like me, Arian began, his voice low. Don't get endings like that. Ishan stepped even closer. Then maybe it's time you stopped deciding what you deserve. That hit deeper than anything else. Arian's composure cracked, just slightly. Enough, for something real to come through. Ishan, he said, almost like a warning. But Ishan didn't stop. Instead, he reached out, this time without hesitation, and took Arian's hand. Not forcefully, not urgently, just honestly. You don't have to stay here alone, he said. The contact was simple, but it carried everything. For a moment, Arian didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't speak. He just stood there, feeling something he had kept himself away from for far too long. Then slowly, his grip tightened. Not much, but enough. Outside, the mountains stood silent, witnesses to something quiet, yet powerful. Let's fix your Jeep first, Arian said after a while. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And somehow, that was enough. Ishan smiled faintly, because he understood. Some journeys didn't begin with certainty. They began with a step. And as they stepped outside together, into the cold, into the light, into whatever waited beyond that cabin, the night they had shared no longer felt like something fleeting. Felt like a beginning. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, that was all that mattered.